the RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast, sponsored by Bank of Ireland.
Hello and welcome along to the RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast, and it's now business time at the tournament. The pool stage is complete. Quarterfinals weekend coming up. Ireland against New Zealand this Saturday night at Stade de France, 8 p.m. That quarterfinal spot secured for Ireland after a 36-14 win against Scotland in Paris at the weekend. Jonny, Holland and Mick Kearney are with me today, and we're going to start by poring over that win against Scotland. We'll get straight into it. Jonny, 36-14. And a scoreline that probably doesn't actually do justice really to how one-sided the game was.
Yeah, it was finished wasn't it? You'd actually get bored, which was a funny thing to say about a kind of a knockout game, wasn't it? But I think Ireland were incredibly good, obviously. But people are kind of saying, and I've seen people say, hearsay, but Scotland didn't turn up. Scotland absolutely turned up. In the first 20 minutes they turned up, but Ireland absolutely shut them down. So I think it was so impressive, because at the start of the game when Scotland were trying to get at Ireland's ball and they knew that they had to do that, obviously their selection reflected that a little bit as well, and they went hard at Ireland's ball. They went at every breakdown, and it didn't take Ireland long to shut them out or to get past them, but Scotland went at them again, and Ireland just did the same thing and got past them again, in very quick succession. So I think they really went at it. I think the problem was, they got the opportunity to score 3 points, and it was clear show of intent that they were going to try and get their points early. But I think hindsight, obviously, but at the time I was thinking, I don't know, go 3-0, put a bit of doubt into Ireland, and the doubt was going to be more powerful than. And yeah, you can get doubt from the corners, but I think easy 3 points, get back, exit, and go again and put them under pressure. And I thought that was the way to go, build the scoreboard pressure. But I think the 18 phase defence was the one that broke them, and Ireland drove on.
Yeah, and Mick, that was what I was going to lead to, that for as much as Ireland scored 6 brilliant tries and some of the attacking stuff they put in was really, really enjoyable to watch, it did even feel, I was there on Saturday, and it felt like in the moment on whatever, kind of 13, 14 minutes when they had that defensive stand after 18 phases, it actually felt there and then, even though it was 5-0, that the game was over. Scotland had gone 3 lineouts down into the 22. On 2 of them, they had tried to maul their way through Ireland and just literally did not budge. Then they go out into the phases. They go backwards from the 5-meter line to the edge of the 22 through 18 phases, and backwards on a lot of those phases as well. And there was just this shift and this reaction, and you could see it in the body language of the players. The Irish players really egged on the celebrations after it. The Scotland players looked dejected, and it was no surprise that a scrum penalty followed instantly. And honestly, in the moment, it just felt there's no way Scotland are going to win this game.
Yeah, huge moment in the game. As you said, you could see from the Scottish players' body language, it really did just suck the life out of them. Ireland's ability to be effective at the breakdown, whether that be slowing it down or making a good decision around the barrage, I just thought was unbelievably impressive. Very similar to what they did against South Africa. It was 7 turnovers to Ireland versus Scotland's 3, in terms of actual turnover penalties. But the impact that I think Ireland were able to have on Scotland's ruck speed in terms of the collision and what they did around the contact area, it stymied Scotland's play for the rest of the game, excluding obviously that 20 phase set that they had against Ireland in the first 20 minutes or whatever it was.
Yeah, and they just looked perfectly comfortable to Ireland. I'm saying now, looked perfectly comfortable to just defend for those phases and wait for the opportunity to make the turnover. If you put yourself back into playing days, and from both sides of this, first of all, when you're a defender and you're on that side and you get that sort of a defensive stop on a turnover, and also when you're an attacking team and you just feel yourself going backwards through all these phases until the point where you just turn over the ball, it must be an incredibly demoralizing feeling being on that attacking side and feeling like you're ultimately running into a wall.
Oh, for sure. And when a team, just going back to the breakdown, I suppose, when a team is putting huge pressure on that breakdown area, and that you're going to have to be incredibly effective in terms of your entries and that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, you're losing collisions in the carry, and you're in a position that you want to hold on to the ball. You know, you want to be attacking, you want to kind of be meeting them on the gain line, and in a position to try and get your shoulders through, so that like you might lose one collision, you might kind of get a little bit of go for it on the next one, and then you can have a crack at spinning it wide. But Scotland were like, they were losing repeated collisions. They were in an area of the pitch where they should be holding onto the ball, and they should be going through phases. But Ireland were they were squeezing them. They were really suffocating them. And you know, I'd imagine from a Scottish point of view, particularly in attack, they were just thinking, oh my God, if we have to go through 80 minutes of this and we're not getting penalties, and we can't really kick the ball away, because Ireland are very effective in terms of that high ball battle. It's going to be a very long day at the office, and obviously that was the case for them.
And Jonny, defense in general. Go ahead, yeah.
Sorry, on that, Neil, I think you know, the moment where they got that maul in the corner and didn't go forward, and Sione Tuipulotu had his little run towards Sexton, which was clearly the direction he was going at, in the way Josh van der Fleer was trying to catch up with him. But van der Fleer got him low, and Sexton didn't really budge up high, you know, and they put him to ground. So that was one of their big ball carrying threats that didn't go forward, because he's running across the pitch trying to force something. And then by the time they got to the edge where you said that on the 5-meter line they got driven back, it was Van der Merwe got driven back, and he's their second one that kind of pulled a rabbit out of a hat in terms of contact. So I think that was like two big wins for Ireland, and that two of their big ball carriers didn't get it on their own terms. Their backs ball carriers, obviously. But I'm not sure about their ball carriers up front as well, like Jack Dempsey and these guys. Like, it's, you know, they don't have the same raw power. Like, they look like they're doing those, but they're not really that effective if the whole team isn't on the front foot and you're not getting soft shoulders from their centres. But they didn't get that. And then I think like Ireland, where you were saying there, but when we're back playing and things, like, and you do feel sometimes when you're comfortable defensively, you don't really care if the opposition have the ball. And that's the kind of feeling you got from Ireland, wasn't it? I know, like, last year Munster didn't kick the ball off the pitch when they were going towards winning the URC, and you think like, oh, you have to get the ball off the pitch against the Stormers and Leinster and these teams that are very effective in their attack, but they were just so comfortable defensively. And that's what it felt like with Ireland. They were so comfortable defensively, they didn't really care where it was. Normally when a team enters your 22, you're like, oh, that's a chance to get points, and most teams will get points. You assume that they'll get something out of it, but Scotland didn't get it because Ireland just stuck within their structures and they weren't going to be cracked. Like,
and one of the running themes of conversation in the post-match press conference with Andy Farrell and Johnny Sexton was around defence. And like, a couple of things Farrell said stood out. Obviously, number one, he said, from speaking to so many people, everyone says it, defence is what wins World Cups ultimately. And also as well, just speaking about how much work they've been able to do over the last few months, where, as he pointed out, in a normal situation during a Six Nations or an Autumn Nation Series campaign, the players are coming back in a week or 10 days before the championship starts, and you're trying to cram in a lot of work in a fairly short period of time. But Ireland have been together the guts of 16 weeks in training camp, give or take a couple of weeks off that the players have had here or there. But ultimately, you're looking at 3 to 4 months of solid work that they've been able to put together, and it's starting to show on the pitch. Like, during the Six Nations, it was a pretty good defense to begin with. I think on average they were conceding 14 points a game. They've conceded 22 points against South Africa and Scotland combined, and realistically 14 of those points were against Scotland when the game was pretty much decided anyway, and you had Gary Ringrose and Jamison Gibson Park playing out on the wings. You know, it was completely disjointed at the same time. But one thing that's really standing out, Jonny, as well, is the height of the Irish tackles. It was something that was highlighted against South Africa, and I was kind of wondering, was it going to be a bit of a one-off where they were consistently chopping down below the waist? And across the whole match against Scotland, but in those 18 phases in particular, going back and looking at it last night, the amount of tackles that were just coming in low and just getting players to ground. And I think maybe the flip side is, when you're in that position as the tackler, it probably, Ireland allowed the Irish players an opportunity a couple of times to roll their way over onto the opposition side and slow things down ever so slightly and just create a little bit of a mess there. But one person I didn't even want to point out in it there was Tadhg Furlong, and I looked back afterwards, and he had, I think, 11 tackles, which is pretty good numbers to begin with. But I reckon he must have had at least another 11 or 12 as a tackler assist that he wasn't getting credit for, because the amount of times in the first half where I saw him swinging out of a tackle down low beneath someone's hips, and this is a tight head prop who's consistently has the fitness now to be able to go in and make those tackles. Like it's a very, very relentless effort, and it's a difficult thing to do to constantly get down that low and chop players down.
Yeah, Tadhg Furlong's not really getting the plaudits at the moment, is he? Like, he's just going under the radar, doing a very good job as a tight head. There was talk when he was fully fit that he was the best tight head in the world, and you can still talk about that. But he's not really the one that people are talking about within the performances. And if you have a tight head putting in that amount of work, and you do have a fit Irish pack as it is, then you're going to get through a whole host of work that way. But I think, like, you're right, and the chop tackles came in, and that allows them to get after the breakdown a bit. But like, I think chop tackling a team against Scotland is dangerous because you get them low and they're a good offloading side. They've got a lot of spark in attack. So all of a sudden you open up those offloading channels. So if you don't get your strategy right, you are actually going to run yourself into a small bit of bother, because people will talk about kind of shutting those offloading channels in. But like, that's not what Ireland did. They chop tackle, but it was 2-man tackles. And if you look at some modern defences now, like, everything is a 2-man tackle, because you get two of them in there, the chop will roll away, and the person hitting high will detach and get after a breakdown. And that's pretty much what they did. They added time to the ball wherever they could, because the assist tackler was in a very strong position, very well set. Like you said, they've so much time together, and the way Andy Farrell makes them get to know each other, I think that it felt like that when they were defending, that they knew each other inside out. So that assist tackler is able to put time on the ball. But then when you get someone like Caelan Doris, who's that assist tackler or anywhere around the breakdown, I don't think he gets half enough credit for what he does around the breakdown. He gets away with a small bit. You see Ireland sometimes when they counter ruck, they initiate the contact from a square position, but they kind of fall around it and they get legs falling everywhere. But it's very hard to referee that, because they've come in from the right place, But I think he doesn't get half enough credit. He's given away 1 or 2 penalties in the last 2 games from the poach position, where he I can't remember why, but I think he definitely gave away one early in the Scotland game, and I think he had one as well.
He gave away the first one against Scotland.
Yeah, and he normally doesn't, so I was surprised that he did. But he came back with a turnover near that Duhan van der Merwe carry, and he's just so relentless at the breakdown. He's really intelligent there as well. If you watch his actions, you can player cam him. Mick, you'll know a bit more about this, but in around the tight, player cam Caelan Doris, and he's just doing like action after action, disrupting people, and he's so hard to play against. But Ireland are very intelligent around those areas as well. Like, it's not by chance,
And Mick, the as Jonny pointed out, the talking on lower tackles, and there is obviously the risk that a team is able to offload. That's something obviously to guard against New Zealand, because if there's one team who are perfectly comfortable chipping the ball out of a tackle, it's the All Blacks.
No, definitely. That's where I think the All Blacks selection is going to be very interesting. In terms of who they actually play. There's been a bit of chat this week as to whether Damien McKenzie is going to come into the mix or not. See, Mwonga's a huge threat around the offload space as well, and then Rieko Ioane, you'd think, is a dead cert to start at 13, but then like Anton Leonard-Brown, the games that they played recently that they've looked really good, he's had a big impact on those games. But back to your point around the offload channels, I think Ireland will have a good plan there. A lot of Ireland's defence, as Jonny mentioned earlier on, there's just guys making really good decisions. As well, as Jonny said, like, every tackle nowadays is a 2-man tackle, and you've one guy going low and one guy going on the ball to either hold it up and try and get that choke so that the breakdown's going to be that bit slower, or else he's throwing that man to ground and he's trying to get in on the jackal or the barge. So I'd imagine Ireland will have a pretty good plan around that this week. And as well, if you lose the collision, the ruck speed and the breakdown is ruined anyway, and that's something that Ireland have done really well in this tournament so far. They've just been dominating collisions.
Jonny, before we move on to the Ireland attack on Scotland, you'd kind of mentioned at the time you were wondering should they have kicked a couple of those threes. When you look back at it now, how are you feeling? I know Gregor Townsend was asked afterwards about whether they should have taken the 3-6-9 approach during that first half. And he was pretty blunt about it. He kind of said we weren't winning the game. We weren't going to win the game like that. You know, with the way Ireland were playing, we had to score tries. I can kind of see that side of it, to be totally honest, looking back at it now with hindsight. Do you think it would have made much of a difference if Scotland were to have maybe on the first one of those penalties tagged on at 3 and see just build a bit of pressure?
Well, with the form Ireland were in, I don't think it'd make any difference what they did. They weren't going to win that game regardless once Ireland turned up like that. I think Gregor Townsend in hindsight is right about that, but I think the first one was important. I don't expect them to go 3-6-9-12 and then go for their try. You know, I don't think that would have worked. But I think, you know, scoring first, putting a marker down. Like I said, if you kick the first easy one, it's 3-0 and Ireland are behind. You know,
well, 5-3 because Ireland had their 5 by that point.
Yeah, fair enough. But did Scotland have a chance before that? I'm not sure. They had the first chance, did they?
No. Sure, lowest try was inside the first 60 seconds.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? But I think just getting something on the scoreboard is important because you'd have clawed them back a small bit, and I think you can just prove that you can score and it's on your own terms and you're not so desperate inside the 22. But that's easy for me to say when they've gone 18 phases and got shut out. You know, so it's I think whatever Scotland would have done at the time, it's probably a bit of a moot point because Ireland were in that form where they were just going to tear them asunder, you know. But I think building some scoreboard pressure, I'd still be in favour of it. I know, like, you go down the line, get your score, get out of there, and get back in return again. Then the pressure's on. But yeah, I'm not so sure. I'd like, obviously they spent so much time on 0 that it became a bit of a desperation station anyway, didn't it? So that's never a good thing from a player psyche looking up at.
On the side of the Irish attack, then this was where it was really fun, particularly in that opening 40 minutes. The first try, James Lowe, just 60 seconds more or less on the clock. Before the game last week with Bernard Jackman on the pod, we were talking about how a fast start was something Ireland probably really, really needed just in general against Scotland, because it's been a while since they had kind of like come out of the blocks really, really hot in a big match. They ended up doing it last Saturday. But on that try, really interesting looking back. I'm curious to get your thoughts, Jonny, as an attack coach, where the break that Gary Ringrose makes up the middle, it's through a fairly soft shoulder in between Xander Fagerson and Grant Gilchrist. And when you look back at it now, it was Ringrose and the Irish backline essentially going up against 4 of the Scottish front 5 defending that line in midfield. And I'd be curious to know, when you look back at that, would you consider that Ireland being able to manipulate that situation to pull players one side and create an environment where Scotland have a lot of tight 5 forwards defending wide spaces? Or is that Gary Ringrose in the moment spotting that there are a few of the heavies defending midfield and realizing, okay, this is the moment where we can throw a little show and go and try go up the middle?
Yeah, I've seen some analysis on this already this morning. Like, and I don't know, you can manipulate it to a degree, and you'll see, like, coming out of a scrum, you'll always have the tight 5 together, and the front 3 are always together. The amount of times you see front row in the middle of the pitch together is frightening, you know. So, like, you do see that picture quite a bit, and obviously you try and get it back to kind of reload early and split that up and try and get a bit of organisation in the middle of the pitch. So I think in some situations of 1 or 2 phases, I think you can set it up, but I don't think you can set it up after multi-phase either. You know, I think that's just the way the rugby is played. I think what you're seeing there is that Ireland are actually just so good at looking up, scanning, seeing what's on, and because they throw more passes, more of those kind of sweep passes out the back and move teams, you do get this kind of panic, or you've less time as well. I think the speed of ball means that the Scotland have less time to actually get those front 3 or the front 5 split up, like, you know. So I think it's just a bit of a function of how they're playing the game. And if you look at Johnny Sexton's eyes, the amount of decisions he makes is absolutely scary. Like, you know, my sole time going up against him, I think that was the biggest learning that I had from him. You can't take your eyes off him. He was always making a decision. He was always dragging you away. Again, Mick, like, you'll know more about this, but he's always talking and looking up and moving people around the place. So he's just a step ahead of most defences, or at least the defence that Scotland put out in front of them at the weekend. So no, I don't think they would have manipulated it, knowing, I think that's going back to the Joe Schmidt era, where if you do this for the next 3-4 phases, then you will get this. And what happened in Ireland that time is that they didn't get those pictures, or they didn't execute those pictures, didn't get front foot ball. And when they didn't, you don't see the picture that you're being told you're going to see in 3 phases time. Whereas now I think they're actually making more decisions on the spot. and that's why they're finding these gaps. But like if you look at the late swing from Mac Hansen, which I know has been highlighted as well, he's on the open side with Johnny Sexton, who Johnny Sexton has decided to bring the attack back the other way, and all he's doing is starting to set up those pod to three on his left hand side. He didn't look at Mac Hansen and tell him to go, but obviously there's an understanding there that there's nothing there for Mac Hansen. So his late swing means that a defence that thinks they're kind of numbered up are now down a number at least, and he's popping up on the outside of Gary Ringrose, which, you know, people will think like, oh, Ringrose spotted that and got through the gap, but every time someone swings, a defender's eye goes somewhere, you know, so it just gives them a second or two less to look at the person that's actually making that break. The same with the Bundyaki one, where someone's trying to read out the back and he took a soft shoulder, and it was Ali Price actually got caught in kind of no man's land, and then he's chasing Gary Ringrose back, like, wasn't it? So I think you're just seeing loads of good decisions and a lot of work rate off the ball and kind of swinging and overloading, because Scotland actually swung all their backs at one stage. Again, that long passage of play that we were talking about, and I was like, oh, I thought it was dangerous. They had 4 or 5 of them swinging at the same time, but Ireland's structure
came down the near side. Was it that moment?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like teams are doing that where they're swinging all their backs at the same time now, and it's very dangerous. But you know, they all went at the same time. They're all a little bit lateral, whereas Ireland were set up really square with their forwards and their pods, dragging passes from Johnny Sexton to the next back. And it's the likes of Mac Hansen getting all the way around, turning up on an outside shoulder that's really doing the damage. But I think there's loads of decisions being made on the spot. And the Irish forwards are making decisions. Like you can see them within those pod to three with the tip-ons and the carries and even inside passes, which are seen as kind of playing under and you'll create slow ball. They're doing it because it's the right decision, not just kind of changing it up for no reason. Like, you know, if there's a soft shoulder anywhere, they're taking it.
Yeah, and Mick on that first try as well, like brilliant stuff from the backs, and Gary Ringrose to spot that kind of hole in the middle, and for Hansen looping around as well. But then you also have the subtle stuff that forwards are doing. And I don't know, just spot like Tyg Byrne in that, just kind of straightening up his run ever so slightly, and it slows down George Turner from getting across. And ultimately that creates an extra half a yard that Ringrose has in between Matt Fagerson and Grant Gilchrist. And I presume as the second and back row here, you'd be able to appreciate that.
I know, 100%. Look, I think George Turner gets too high there anyway. But you're spot on. It results in Fagerson having to drop under George Turner, and he's never going to get there. You know, it's, as Jonny mentioned there, it's a great decision by Gary to show him go, and then Mac Hansen's swing is like, he comes from a long way, but I think there's obviously a collective understanding around the backs that if they get to a 15 and they're sweeping back, that those lads have to get on their bike, you know, because like the last thing that they want to have is that it's a 3-3 in terms of the backs. Like, so 3 on one side of the ruck and 3 on the other side. You can actively see that they're trying to create, you know, 4-2s or 5-1s in terms of the lads who are sitting on the blind side from a back's point of view, coming around behind those forward shapes. And, you know, you could see even late in the game when Gibson Park was playing on the wing, Sheehan scored in the 63rd or 64th minute. And there's a ruck, like they actually spin it out to Gibson Park, who makes a break up the right, and he gets tackled. They do one play back in, and then Gibson Park is actually the one who gives the last pass to Sheehan on the edge. So like he gets up out of that ruck, bursts his bollocks to get around outside. I think Ringrose throws it out the back to him. Bundy he's in no man's land because he didn't realize that Gibson Park was going to get there that quickly. Then it ends up just going behind him to Sheehan. So, you know, the work rate and the effort from these guys to put themselves in a position to be effective from an attacking point of view is just unbelievable. And even, you know, the stuff that they're doing, or that they did do against Scotland to nullify their line speed, as Jonny said, they're making the right decision in terms of inside passes and outside tips. But they did a lot of that early in the game, so it meant that later on in the game, it just checked that defender. He knew that he couldn't fly. He couldn't fly on the ball carrier, because if that tip was given or the minus was given, there's a good chance it was going to be a one-man ruck for Ireland, because they'd gotten that bit of gain line. Couple that with some of the stuff they did around set piece. Like Ireland did a lot of 6-man lineouts, but they brought Van der Fleer in front of the prop at the front. And you know, if you play against Glasgow at any stage during the year, they'll always defend that lineout with 5 men. So it means that they're only going to be getting single lifts. They're only going to be getting single lifts against the Ireland setup. Van der Fleer could come in as +1, and then he was given a short pass to Gibson Park, who's then given a short pass to Jonny, or else to Bundy coming short. So Scotland couldn't actually really get that line speed, you know, because instead of it being one massive long pass to 12 or 10, where, you know, they could really get off the line and get going, it was they had to check on Gibson Park before the second pass was given to the next back, you know.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to see.
And that was that picture then in my head. That's the second try, Jonny, isn't it? That's Josh van der Fleer as the receiver, out to Gibson Park, out to Sexton, and just shortening up those passes. But to go back on what Mick was saying with, like, talking about Gibson Park and his role in Sheehan's try, but all of that, it really does point to a brilliant understanding that each of those players, particularly in the back line, have for the roles of everyone else in the back line, where, like, in Murrayfield, it was the forwards where we had substitution chaos, where we Cian Healy at hooker and Josh van der Fleer thrown into lineouts. And this time round, you lose Mac Hansen and you lose James Lowe by half time. And I know the game was done and dusted by half time, but you've Jamison Gibson Park and Gary Ringrose as your wingers. Gary Ringrose playing wing for the guts of an hour, Stuart McCluskey coming into the centre then. There's a huge amount of changes that are happening in that backline in game. And to see the level of understanding that Gibson Park has, where, okay, he's made this break down the right touch line, but now there's space over on the far side and he's busting his gut to get out there. And just knowing what's expected of each role, it's really, really interesting to see. And I'm sure as an attack coach, you're probably fascinated by it.
Yeah, but I think Andy Farrell said it's thought out like that with his selections. Like, I think over the whole World Cup cycle, and even like in the last year or two, you've been kind of thinking, oh, surely he's going to pick Gavin Coombs, or surely he's going to pick this person, that person. Joe McCarthy has to go in there. And I know Joe McCarthy's part of the squad and everything else, but I think, like, you can see now maybe that he was, you know, very clear in his own mind early on about, you know, the ability of these rugby players. Like, that's not, I think Gavin Coombs can do all these roles with second row and back row and everything else, but he's obviously picked his selections based on very intelligent rugby players. And he, I think there's a bit of that in the selection of Jack Crowley as well. Like, you know, that if anything happened, I think he can play in a couple of positions. Unfortunately, Jimmy O'Brien can as well, but he hasn't really gotten the selection. But I'm not surprised that Gary Ringrose had that performance. He's done that with Leinster, and he's gone onto the wing and he performs really well. He's just such an intelligent rugby player. I think another person who, you know, got a bit of hype at one stage, he's not getting the full hype that he should get. I saw people saying that he's playing poorly at one stage in this World Cup, and I was tearing my hair out. I couldn't believe what they were actually watching. He's an incredible rugby player, and he's the first person that I would always look at when you see Leinster Ireland games and you see like a back picture and you see the amount of ground he covers on that swing. He's an incredible work rate, but his intelligence to do it is unreal. But I suppose not surprised by Jamison Gibson Park. He's a ridiculous footballer, so I'm not surprised that he did it. We just haven't seen that before. So to see him putting it into action was class. But he said in his interview afterwards that, like, he's trained there, you know. So they seem to have, and not to get carried away, there's a quarter final at the weekend in New Zealand and all the rest of it, and we haven't got past it at any stage. So not to get carried away with them, but they're so impressive at this stage. If there wasn't a quarter final coming up, I think we'd be getting carried away with ourselves, being able to boast about how impressive they are, but we're just a small bit Irish and staying within our box a small bit. But they're like the way he performed, the way he could understand that and everything else, I think is just shows the level that they're getting to in terms of their understanding and their collective knowledge.
Mick, you're not getting ahead of yourself. You're so wary of New Zealand during the high-vis vest today.
No, safety first, definitely. Look, I think it's a big test. Obviously, it's a big test this week against New Zealand, but there's been like some bizarre stuff going on that I've just read in the media around the New Zealand camp as well. You know, Ian Foster seems to have banned Scott Robertson from going to any of the games or linking up with the group or anything like that for fear of distraction. You know, then you obviously have Jason Ryan there who's coaching the forwards, and he's essentially Scott Robertson's best friend, you know. And there's been stuff in the past, and I don't want this to be like Gossip Girl stuff, but there's been like images in the past of the coaching box where, you know, Jason Ryan is visibly, you know, not happy with Joe Schmidt and all these other like weird situations. And as we all know, like everything comes from the top in in rugby and in business. Like how the top man operates is how everyone else operates in rugby teams. So like it'll be interesting now to see how those relationships kind of permeate down through the rest of the group, particularly going into this weekend.
Yeah, and the Joe Schmidt narrative, Jonny, obviously is just a massive thing for everyone this week. And like he's been there a year. I know he was there when Ireland were playing in the series last summer, but he was kind of just jettisoned in as an emergency option when there was a COVID outbreak. But now he's 12, 15, 16 months down the line. Feet are very much under the table there, and he has his stamp put on this team. But in general with New Zealand, I'm finding it very, very difficult to get a read on them for what they are at the moment and how good they are, because okay, they've had 3 massive wins in a row, but it was 3 wins against Namibia, Italy, and Uruguay. And the Italy game in particular, I mean, it was just an embarrassing performance from Italy. And while they scored some fantastic tries, it's really, really tough to get a gauge on how difficult it was for them. Similar to, we'll say, like Ireland against Romania in that opening match, where everything just kind of came so easily to them. So in one sense, they're playing very, very well. But on the flip side, it's 4 weeks now since we've actually seen them in a real white-hot test match.
I'm a bit like you. I can't get a read on them at all. I don't really know what they're going to do this weekend, because I've seen like interviews and stuff, and they're saying their structures will change. It'll become more kind of top tier test rugby, but you can't just turn that on. Like, they haven't had it in the last couple of weeks, and Ireland psychologically have had everything in the last couple of weeks. They've had South Africa coming to take their crown back and their number 1 spot back. You'd Scotland, who are the nagging little brother of the Six Nations, who can get you, but they're always only threatening to do it. So I think Ireland have had all the psychological battles of kind of nearly being an underdog, also being a red hot favourite, and having to pull out their best game to actually play and win those up to the last seconds of the South Africa game in the collapsed maul. So I think New Zealand don't have that. They have 240 points scored, 20 against, gives you absolutely zero reflection on where they're at, because like their connections haven't been challenged. Their attack hasn't really been challenged in terms of having to get through structures. When they haven't really lost their way in attack, they haven't had to they just gone and scored. So I think that's possibly going to come back to get them. You can argue freshness and you can argue all that, and we don't really know what they're about. But I just don't think you can go into the Ireland game with that level played. I think the Italian 96-0, wasn't it? I think that was the one where you're kind of going, oh Jesus, they're back. But when you look at what Italy did against France, Italy were chronic, and like New Zealand are the best team ever to be so ruthless. Like if they are going to beat a team by 40 or 50, they're going to do it by nearly 100. They're the best team at just keeping the foot on the throat. I don't think other teams do it as much. France didn't do it with the Italian game. New Zealand they kind of accentuate that a small bit, so I don't think you're getting a real reflection of what they are. And I think Ireland are going to cause them all sorts of trouble when it gets tight.
Yeah, I think it'll be very much hindsight will dictate the answer to it, where if Ireland beat New Zealand, it's because New Zealand hadn't been tested for a few weeks, and if New Zealand win, it's because they've had some nice confidence boosting wins in a row. But Mick, to go back on the All Blacks, and while we're not really certain what we're getting, while we're not really entirely certain what's coming, what we do know is there are insane levels of motivation there based on what happened against Ireland last summer in New Zealand, losing a 3-test series from 1-0 up. And if there's one team in the world who you don't want to be playing on the rebound, it's the All Blacks, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. Like, look, there's obviously there's that series down there where Ireland did the business, which was unreal, but going off previous World Cups, like Ireland lost, what was it, 46-14 in the last quarterfinal, so like, don't be wrong, brilliant to win the series down there, but Ireland are still on a bit of a revenge mission, and I'm not sure. Like, I'd like to think that's something that's going to be mentioned this week, because like the hurt that would have caused the players that were involved in that game going home after another quarterfinal, it's going to be fascinating to see. You'd know better than me now, Neil, but what the media angles are as we get further into the week, you know. Ireland have been, I think they've been pretty good in that space. Scotland obviously had a howler in terms of saying that they were gonna knock Ireland off, and then, you know, not even putting their boots on to go out and play. Aside from that long phase at the start, but I just think it's going to be fascinating to see what New Zealand's angle is around motivation, aside from losing that series, and what they're gonna put out into the media sphere for all of us to talk into.
I think on that though, isn't it? You know, Ireland beat them in Dublin, and Ireland have beaten them around the place in the last couple of years anyway. And that whole thing of bringing the series back to New Zealand was right. We'll kind of teach them a lesson or two here, and Ireland still won that one. You know, so I think the whole New Zealand revenge piece is strong. By the way, I don't, you know, I'd be kind of wary of them, very wary of them actually in that revenge piece, because they are that team that do it to you. But they've already had their chance at revenge against Ireland at home, and they didn't do it. So now you're starting to think, are Ireland psychologically on top of them, or do they have another bit of a revenge piece, despite Ireland already looking for their revenge in a quarterfinal, like Mick said. So like there's such big psychological battles for us to try and tap into and see what they're really going to be talking about. But only the group themselves know, you know, how they're going to deal with, how Ireland are going to deal with having beaten them away from home. Are they just going to stay on top of them? Is that their message, just stay on top? Or is it, you know, are we still talking about the quarterfinal 46-14? And New Zealand, like, you know, I think they're probably the only team in the world that would take that 2-1 loss at home as personally as they do. You know, other teams would probably just park it, and the World Cup quarterfinal is the one on their minds, like, you know. So it's really hard to tell like who has more of the psychological advantage, but they're both in their own heads in terms of trying to get revenge. So you should see a fairly spicy affair.
Yeah, and Jonny, like I know you were writing about the psychological element to this game in your column with RTÉ.ie this morning, which people can go read it now after this podcast is finished. They can get the full version of it. But obviously, like, you did mention Gary Keegan in it, and I honestly can't get over. I've been following the Irish team in kind of press conferences and stuff for the last couple of years now, and I cannot get over how often, particularly in the last 12 months, that Gary Keegan's name gets brought up unprompted by players or by management about the work he is doing. His name is constantly being thrown out there in the media, but by and large it is because the players are constantly referencing the work that they're doing with him, unprompted and unquestioned, and it is clear that this guy is having an enormous impact on the confidence levels and the performance anxiety that was kind of quoted after the 2019 elimination. If Ireland are to lose against New Zealand this weekend, it certainly doesn't feel right now that it's going to be anything necessarily to do with performance anxiety. It's probably just going to come down to rugby skills and a better team on the day winning.
Well, that's what's going to annoy me. Like if you know, the tragedy does happen and Ireland lose, it's going to be another long 4 years of talking about quarterfinal battling. It won't be a battling. It's New Zealand who are obviously so strong in World Cup tournaments, you know, that it's going to be just really frustrating to have to listen to that again. But yeah, I think it's not going to be because of performance anxiety or lack of performance. If New Zealand beat them, it's going to be on rugby and strategy. You know, it's not going to be anything else, because like I was in similar circles to Gary Keegan at one stage. I don't know Gary Keegan at all, but he worked with Cork Hurlers while I was there. And again, it was there's an aura about him that I'm trying to understand as well, because I could see him in around the team talks on the pitch. He's in hanging around the back of it. He obviously has to listen to the messaging and everything else. But you know, I was told from GAA, like, you get Gary Keegan back and you're back. Like, you know, this is the kind of effect that he has on teams. But I think like what he's done with Ireland is that, you know, the sports psychology space is very interesting at the moment. Like I think, you know, you're changing to very positive ways of putting the message out there. And Ireland have certainly done that through Johnny Sexton, going back 2 to 3 years now. Not afraid to talk about a World Cup, not afraid to talk about a quarterfinal loss. They're just confronting it head on. And I think that's part of the rehabilitation process for them going into this World Cup, is that they know what they're taking on, you know, and they're not trying to hide from it at all, and not trying to stick to the process and all these boring things. They're taking it on head on. And I think that's a really interesting thing. And that's probably what Gary Keegan is doing in the background, just kind of filling their boots for them and teaching them how to get by when you have a little bit of maybe mental anxiety, or maybe a bit of an uncertainty around things. How do you get back into that winning space? Like, and it's going to be interesting, because, you know, you don't see a psychologist getting that much airtime. They tried to stay in the background, but he hasn't been able to, despite not really being the one driving it. He did an interview this time around, didn't he? And I thought that was surprising. But again, what's the voodoo about? Why can't we speak to the psychologist that's driving the big psychological turnaround for Ireland? Like, it's put it all out there and let's see where we land, you know.
Yeah, I think if he does go and help Ireland win a World Cup, he can stick a zero onto his asking price for his next job. Mick, what, if there are any, if there aren't, tell us. But are there areas in Ireland's game that you think are vulnerable to the All Blacks?
I actually can't think. I can't think of much off the top of my head. If I'm being totally honest, like being a second row, I'd instantly start at set piece. That's where everything starts for me. And I think, you know, scrum and line out wise, we're really well set for this one. I think New Zealand are in shaky enough territory around the scrum piece. You know, getting Lomax back is huge for them. You know, because it means they can roll Laulala off the bench for the last 20-30 minutes, whereas previous to that it was Laulala starting and then Fletcher Newell coming on, and he had a couple of tough days at the office. In terms of the line out, I think it's going to be interesting to see. Obviously Barrett and Retallick are world class, but you know, it'll be interesting to see whether they give Whitelock a crack there ahead of one of those lads, because he's been there, done that. And then, you know, you've the back row piece. Is Papali'i gonna start? Is Kane gonna come in at 7? What's gonna happen there? I think Frizzell he's dead set. He's dead set at 6 for that physical piece. So that's something that I felt they were maybe missing in that French game. But in summary, unless the game gets unbelievably unstructured, which I can't really see happening with the way Ireland have been defending up to this point. There's not a massive amount that I've seen from New Zealand so far that I think Ireland should be very worried about.
Jonny, in terms of selections, who would you least like to see start for New Zealand from an Irish perspective? Damien McKenzie or Beauden Barrett at fullback?
No, I think Mick touched on it at the start. Damien McKenzie is doing all sorts at the moment, and maybe he's doing it in the games where they're having their own way with teams. But I'm so impressed with him every time I see him play. That's mad to say about someone like him. He's been around the block so much now, but he's so dangerous. And I think it's going to take an attacking strategy, you know, a Joe Schmidt special, like, you know, to put Ireland out of their comfort zone. I'm not sure Ireland are going to be put that far out of their comfort zone. When a defensive structure is set well and you're making good decisions, they can throw what they want at you, and there might be a mistake or two, but in general, you don't get caught on the hop, like, you know. But like Mick said there, the set piece for Zell is a massive part for them in terms of the physicality. Maybe he'll get them over the game line. Maybe someone will miss a tackle and allow them to get on the front foot, and then the game becomes harder. Will Porter get done in some scrum for his angle? I don't know. It hasn't happened in such a long time. We shouldn't really be talking about it anymore. But it's one of those games where it's going to have to be a refereeing decision on Porter's scrum, or someone getting on top of someone somewhere, that there's going to be a kind of a worried look around that pack, being like, what's going on? You know, that's what New Zealand need, I think, within the pack, for them to get the upper hand. And then I think, like we saw in the summer test last year, that it actually, I was interested. I saw some of it this morning. It was being analysed, and New Zealand used that third runner in their forward pod to get a little bit of go forward on Ireland. And that's how they disrupted Ireland in terms of getting go forward and getting their attack in play. And there we were thinking that Ireland were geniuses against South Africa using their third man in the forward pod. But maybe they learned something from that test tour last year and decided to keep that one in their back pocket as well. Like, you know, so I think it'll take something very, very subtle, Joe Schmidt set piece, a little bit of an attacking structure to get them on the front foot. And once they're on the front foot, I think they'll cause any team damage. It's just getting there, I think, is the main part. Like Mick said, the set piece is important. Everything flows from there, stems from there. So if they can get a little bit of an edge and get a little bit of front football, then we'll see the real New Zealand.
Yeah, and then just quickly, Jonny, how much of your confidence levels would be dictated on team announcement, which is actually going to be tomorrow, Wednesday, rather than the usual Thursday? How much of your confidence levels would be dictated by decisions around, is James Ryan fit? Is Mack Hansen fit? Is James Lowe good to go? Lowe probably should be after getting the poke in the eye, but Mack Hansen calf injury, James Ryan seeing a specialist over his wrist, the second wrist injury, different arms as well, bizarrely in consecutive games. But how much of the confidence levels could fluctuate based on whether those players are fit?
My confidence levels are funny anyway. I'm a pessimist when it comes to these results. So like I was actually, for the first time in a long while, I was like, dare I dream? You know, like will I start saying out loud that Ireland are going to win it? But I think I'd be 60-40 Ireland will win it if James Lowe, Mac Hansen, if they're fit, and if Furlong's okay as well. I know he was kind of looking at his hamstring, glute, kind of whatever he was doing. But I think they were being very cautious too, weren't they? Because the game was obviously, they were in full control, so they were being quite cautious. So I think we'll, like, because of the fact that they are naming it on Wednesday, I would reckon they're confident enough. And I think Henderson's going to start anyway, isn't he? He seemed to do the business
brilliant
there. He was excellent.
Mick, I'm sure you can appreciate what he was doing, Mick, Ian Henderson. Like, because he was, you see his try just brutes his way over the line. But in the first minute, he's there with lovely little soft hands. He's holding up tacklers. He was like all action stuff from Henderson and fully justified his selection.
Definitely. I thought Henderson had an excellent game, you know, particularly in that contact zone. Like you mentioned, there was deft touches around that, but at the end of the day, playing second row, it's all about the contact zone. You know, that's all that's what you earn your crust off. In saying that, I think if James Ryan is out, I think it's a huge loss. I know Henderson might have justified his selection, and he could well be starting again this week. I played with him up in Ulster. He's a cracking guy, but if I was picking the team tomorrow, I'd have James Ryan starting. For, you know, the leadership is kind of is the wrong way to put it, but James he's a perennial winner. You know, and that's not to say that Henderson isn't, but he's always had good days with Ireland. You know, he had that Grand Slam when he was 22 in England, and you know, I think I'd argue that if he hadn't come off in that Champions Cup game against La Rochelle, that Leinster probably would have gone on to win it. You know, in my mind, he was the physical difference there. I'm sure Henderson, like, looking like when he starts this week, he'll have another belter. But personally, if I was picking the team, I would have had James Ryan in there. And in terms of the back's injuries, I don't really know, so I won't pass too much comment on that.
You know, on the James Ryan Henderson thing, because that selection is so tight, and clearly you can see if there's a different coach, you can go one player or the other. That's your bench, and and that's the drop off to maybe someone else. You know, James Ryan and Ian Henderson are both well deserving of their start, and if you have to deliver that bad news as a coach, you know, you have the other guy coming on and a little bit kind of angry about it as well. I think that'll be so you do need, I don't mean to play that down, James Ryan is hugely important, whether he starts, comes off the bench, to have that amount of quality coming on. And that's why, going back to your point, if you miss James Lowe, you know, Mac Hansen, Tyke Furlong, it becomes France 2015. Was that the World Cup? We lost everyone. I think this Ireland side is different. They're all up to speed, but you can be up to speed and you can know the structures and the detail. But again, there's a couple of very, very important people in terms of breaking things down. Mac Hansen getting on Gary Ringrose's shoulder to drag the eyes for his dummy. James Lowe, just in general, the amount of work he does. Those players are sometimes irreplaceable. You wouldn't like to say that, but it has a knock-on effect on what comes onto the pitch and what's left after that as well. Like, you know, so game breakers they're hard to come by.
Well, we'll find out whether they are going to be fit tomorrow afternoon, Wednesday. That's when Ireland are announcing their team. We'll have another pod coming up on Thursday afternoon. And a reminder, plenty of games this weekend on RT2 and RT Player. England against Fiji and France, South Africa are the two quarterfinals on RT this week. Radio commentary of Ireland against New Zealand on Saturday night on RT Radio 1. And you can follow our live blogs as well on rte.ie/sport or on the RT News app. Very finally, guys, Portugal, we have to give them a mention as quick as it's going to be, but a win, I think that was coming, in fairness to them, because they got that draw against Portugal, and you know, they were a place kick away from winning it. And just having, from what we've heard, Ireland played them over, you know, kind of a little training game over in over in Portugal when Ireland were having their camp there, and by all accounts they caused Ireland enormous problems, is what we've heard. So it's no surprise to see them do so well. But Jonny, the frustrating thing is for Portugal now, is it going to be, all right guys, pack your bags, we'll see you again in 4 years? Is that the frustration?
Yeah, like what do they have to build on between now and the next World Cup? I think that's the massive challenge for getting these teams up to speed, getting them proper test matches in the autumn in whatever windows that they're playing in, you know, because you can't. I know, like, I think England announced their fixtures again recently. It's all the top teams like playing against each other all the time, and you're kind of siloing them all together, the top 5, 6, 7 teams, and they're all playing against each other the whole time, like, you know. So I don't know what the answers are. It's far too political and far too above my pay grade to be giving the answers on the tier 2 countries, but they were absolutely phenomenal. I said that to you. I turned off the match at 77 minutes. What an idiot. 76. I kind of went, I'll go off the bed. That's kind of it. And Portugal proved otherwise. Like, you know, the way they play the game, they look unbelievable. And like I said there with the Ireland selection, a couple of players makes a big difference. If you get a bit more experience into some of these Portuguese players, you know, all of a sudden they start driving the standards a little bit more. But like Fiji just looked so unstructured. The unstructured stuff got to them. They didn't know where to go. They had so much ball in the Portuguese 22. So I think they're to blame for a lot of this as well. The fact that Portugal went down and got the win. But, you know, it's the celebrations afterwards. I think it was everyone but Fiji really celebrating that one.
Yeah, Mick, it was just great to see in general. And what I've loved about Portugal and Uruguay as well is not necessarily the biggest teams in the world, but just their simple skills have been really, really sharp.
Oh, definitely. And look, as you mentioned earlier with Ireland, obviously Andy Farrell said it, they've had 14 or 16 weeks together in camp, and this is what's massively opened the tier 2 conversation more than ever, in my opinion, is that these lads they've had a huge amount of time together. You know, like, bearing in mind that some of the Portuguese players, some of the Uruguayan players, like they work in banks. You know, they work on building sites. Like, this is like a part-time thing for them, you know. So we can only imagine how much better they'd be if it was actually something they were committed to full time. Like Jonny mentioned, they were playing against quality opposition on a regular basis. I think as well as that, like, you know, it was just heartwarming. Just heartwarming. See Portugal go out, do the business, play really well. They've obviously got some really good coaching. I heard that Victor Matfield was in coaching their line out for a couple of sessions, and he was talking them up as well. That trick play that they scored off a line out a couple of weeks ago against Wales. Yeah. That was Victor Matfield inspired, from what I heard. Not to take credit away from the poor Portuguese fella who probably put it together, but no, it was great. It's great to see those countries doing well, and you know, as Jonny said, politically, I'd be well out of the loop on that, but hopefully something can be done over the next couple of years to give them a bit more exposure to quality opposition.
Yeah, fingers crossed it's not the last we're seeing of Portugal for a little while. Lads, I've kept you long enough. We're going nearly an hour at this stage. Jonny Holland and Mick Kearney, thanks a million. Best of luck as well this weekend. Mick, you're up against Terranure with Clontarf. Jonny up in Ballynahinch, am I right in saying?
You are. The long trip.
Glamour fixture.
Exactly. That's the game of the weekend. Look, get to a match on Saturday and you can hang around your clubhouse and watch Ireland against New Zealand on Saturday night. What could be better, maybe aside from being there? But listen, we'll call it a day. We'll chat to the rest of you on Thursday when we have another pod coming your way.
The RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast, sponsored by Bank of Ireland.